Welcome to Globewise Entertainment, the channel where we dive deep into the bold, the shocking, and the unforgettable stories of cinema history. Today, we're taking you back to the wild 1970s, an era when filmmakers pushed boundaries like never before. From grindhouse theaters to cult classics, these are 20 exploitation films that shocked audiences, sparked controversy, and redefined what movies could get away with. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, make sure to hit that button now so you never miss our deep dives into Hollywood's most daring moments. And don't forget, as we count down, let us know in the comments which of these shocking 70s films left the biggest impression on you. 1. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. In 1978, I Spit on Your Grave shocked audiences like never before. On the surface, it looked like another low-budget revenge thriller, but what made it infamous was its raw, uncompromising intensity. Directed by Mayor Zarki, the film followed a young writer seeking peace in the countryside, only to endure a harrowing ordeal that pushed her beyond her breaking point. Critics condemned it as one of the most disturbing exploitation films of its time, while others praised it as a powerful statement on survival and vengeance. Banned in several countries and heavily censored worldwide, the movie sparked debates that still rage today. Was it pure shock value or a brutal reflection of human resilience? Love it or hate it, I Spit on Your Grave carved its place in film history as one of the most controversial exploitation movies of the 1970s, forever testing the boundaries of what cinema could show. 2. Deathbed, the Bed That Eats, 1977. In 1977, audiences were introduced to one of the strangest exploitation films ever made, Deathbed, the Bed That Eats. Yes, the title says it all, a cursed, demonic bed that literally consumes anyone unlucky enough to lie on it. Created on a shoestring budget by filmmaker George Barry, the movie blended surreal horror, dark comedy, and dreamlike visuals. Victims didn't just disappear. They were digested in bizarre, unsettling ways, from bones dissolving in yellow goo to entire meals vanishing into its sheets. Though nearly lost for decades, the film became a cult sensation after fans discovered rare VHS copies in the 90s. Today, it's remembered as one of exploitation cinema's most bizarre and unforgettable oddities, proof that the 70s truly pushed the boundaries of horror filmmaking. 3. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Set in World War II, this film pushed boundaries with its mix of historical fiction and extreme exploitation elements. Starring Diane Thorne as the ruthless camp commandant Ilsa, it became infamous worldwide for its brutal imagery and controversial themes. Despite its notoriety, the movie struck a nerve with audiences and launched a whole wave of naze-exploitation films that shocked the 1970s grindhouse circuit. What's even more surprising? It was filmed on the leftover sets of the classic TV show Hogan's Heroes, a bizarre contrast between comedy and horror. Though banned in many countries, Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS remains one of the most talked about exploitation films ever made, forever cementing its place in cinema history as both disturbing and unforgettable. 4. Caged Heat, 1974. In 1974, Caged Heat stormed onto the grindhouse circuit, redefining the women-in-prison exploitation genre. Directed by Jonathan Demme, who would later win an Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs, this was no ordinary B-movie. On the surface, it promised action, rebellion, and shocking prison sequences. But underneath, Demme infused biting social satire, critiquing abuse of power, institutional corruption, and the suppression of individuality. What really set Caged Heat apart was its unique mix of exploitation thrills and sharp political commentary, a combination rare for its time. With a driving soundtrack by John Cale of the Velvet Underground, the film became a cult favorite, showing how even the grittiest exploitation cinema could deliver more than just shock value. Today, it stands as both a cult classic and an early glimpse of a legendary director cutting his teeth on the edge of Hollywood's wildest era. 5. Faces of Death, 1978. Faces of Death, 1978, is one of the most notorious exploitation films of the 1970s. Marketed as a shocking documentary, it claimed to show real scenes of death and tragedy, something no mainstream film dared to attempt at the time. Viewers were horrified, and the movie quickly gained a reputation as the film you weren't supposed to watch. But here's the twist. Much of it was staged with special effects, animal footage, and clever editing. That didn't stop it from being banned in multiple countries and whispered about for years in underground circles. What Faces of Death truly did was push the boundaries of exploitation cinema, blurring the line between reality and fiction, sparking outrage, and proving controversy could drive massive box office success. Whether people loved it or hated it, one thing is certain: Faces of Death changed how audiences looked at the power and danger of shock cinema. 6. Fight for Your Life, 1977. This grindhouse shocker was so controversial that many theaters refused to screen it. On the surface, it's a violent home invasion thriller, but beneath the exploitation veneer lies a raw look at race, power, and survival in 1970s America. The story follows a ruthless gang who terrorize a preacher's family, unleashing disturbing violence and racial slurs that shocked audiences at the time. But here's what made it infamous. Unlike many exploitation films, Fight for Your Life didn't shy away from flipping the script. By the end, the victims take brutal revenge, turning the tables in a cathartic, but deeply unsettling, final act. Critics called it one of the most offensive films of the decade, while others praised it as a bold statement on justice and race relations. Today, it remains banned in some countries, yet cult audiences hail it as one of the most daring exploitation films ever made. 7. Supervixens, 1975. Supervixens, 1975. Directed by cult icon Russ Meyer, this outrageous film took 70s exploitation to a whole new level. Meyer, already famous for his wild and over-the-top style, delivered Supervixens as a surreal blend of crime, comedy, and extreme sexuality. The movie follows Clint, a gas station worker on the run after being framed for murder, who encounters larger-than-life women with equally explosive personalities. What shocked audiences wasn't just the over-the-top characters, but Meyer's unapologetic mix of violence and eroticism, something that made the film both controversial and unforgettable. While critics called it excessive, fans embraced it as a guilty pleasure cult classic that still represents the wild, anything-goes spirit of 70s exploitation cinema. Supervixens pushed boundaries, challenged censors, and remains a jaw-dropping reminder of just how far 70s filmmakers were willing to go. 8. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. A film that terrified audiences with its raw, documentary-like style. What made it so shocking wasn't endless gore, but the suggestion of violence. Director Tobe Hooper kept the budget low and the tension sky-high, creating a chilling atmosphere that felt disturbingly real. When it premiered, many theaters outright refused to screen it, and several countries banned it completely. Yet, despite the controversy, it became a box office sensation, earning more than $30 million on a budget of under $150,000. What truly set it apart was the introduction of Leatherface, a character inspired by real-life crimes, who has since become one of horror's most infamous icons. 9. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. In 1976, the underground shocker Blood-Sucking Freaks hit theaters, and immediately sparked outrage. Marketed as a horror comedy, it became infamous for its graphic violence and over-the-top sadism. The film followed a sadistic theater director who staged bizarre torture shows for unsuspecting audiences. But what really pushed it over the edge was its mix of gore, dark humor, and exploitation of taboo subjects. Critics called it filth masquerading as entertainment, and protests erupted outside theaters. For years, it was banned or heavily censored around the world. Yet, ironically, the controversy only fueled its cult status, turning Blood-Sucking Freaks into one of the most notorious exploitation films of the 1970s. It's a shocking reminder of how far filmmakers were willing to go to test society's limits. 10. Black Mama White Mama, 1973. A wild ride in the world of 70s exploitation cinema. Starring Pam Grier and Margaret Markoff, this gritty action thriller flips the script on the old, the Defiant Ones formula. Two women from opposite worlds, one a tough streetwise rebel, the other a political activist, find themselves shackled together after breaking out of a brutal women's prison. What follows is pure 70s grindhouse, explosive gunfights, corrupt officials, jungle chases, and plenty of razor-sharp tension between the leads. But beyond the chaos, the film stood out for giving audiences two strong female characters in a genre usually dominated by men. It mixed blaxploitation with women in prison tropes, making it a cult classic that still gets talked about today. Black Mama, White Mama didn't just push boundaries. It broke chains, literally and figuratively, and cemented Pam Grier as an unstoppable icon of 70s cinema. 11. Ms. 45, 1979. A shocking exploitation classic that blurred the line between art, revenge, and controversy. The film follows Thana, a mute seamstress in New York City who endures brutal assaults in a single day. But instead of staying silent, she transforms into a gun-toting vigilante, stalking the city's dark alleys at night. With every pull of the trigger, the movie forces audiences to confront questions about justice, trauma, and the dangers of unchecked violence. What made Ms. 45 so controversial wasn't just the graphic content. It was the raw way it gave power back to a voiceless woman in a world that constantly tried to silence her. Directed by Abel Ferrara, the film was banned and heavily censored in several countries, yet today it's hailed as a feminist exploitation cult classic. Ms. 45 remains one of the boldest revenge films of the 1970s, pushing the boundaries of morality, censorship, and what cinema dared to show. 12. Mako: The Jaws of Death, 1976. A wild twist on the shark craze that followed Spielberg's Jaws. But unlike the blockbuster, this exploitation gem paints the sharks as misunderstood victims and humans as the real predators. The story follows a Vietnam veteran who mysteriously gains psychic powers that allow him to communicate with sharks. Instead of fearing them, he sees them as his only true friends, until greedy scientists, ruthless divers, and shady collectors try to exploit the creatures for profit. That's when the film flips the script. The sharks become avenging forces, guided by their human ally in a bloody rampage against those who harmed them. What pushed this movie into pure exploitation territory was its mix of animal rights themes with grindhouse-style gore. Unlike Spielberg's polished thriller, Mako dove headfirst into graphic violence and low-budget spectacle. It wasn't about suspense, it was about shock value. Today, it stands as a fascinating example of 70s exploitation cinema, cheap, gritty, morally twisted, and unforgettable. 13. Welcome Home Brother Charles, 1975. A film that truly pushed the boundaries of 1970s exploitation cinema. Directed by Jama Fanaka, this movie stood out from the era's flood of blaxploitation films because it wasn't just about action, it was a bold commentary on systemic racism, the prison system, and black empowerment. The story follows Charles, a man wrongfully imprisoned, who returns home seeking justice against a corrupt establishment that tried to break him. What shocked audiences wasn't just the social critique, but the surreal twist Fanaka added. The film blended gritty realism with outrageous, even bizarre elements that made it unforgettable and controversial. While critics were divided, many praised it for tackling serious racial issues under the disguise of exploitation tropes. Today, Welcome Home Brother Charles is remembered as both a cult classic and a daring experiment. It pushed audiences to question the boundaries between exploitation and social commentary, carving out a unique legacy in cinema history. 14. Mansion of the Doomed, 1976. In the gritty world of 1970s exploitation cinema, Mansion of the Doomed stands out as a shocking descent into medical madness. Directed by Michael Pataki, This chilling film follows Dr. Leonard Cheney, a once brilliant surgeon who becomes obsessed with restoring his daughter's eyesight after a tragic accident blinds her. But instead of ethical science, he turns to a horrific solution: kidnapping innocent victims and removing their eyes to perform grotesque transplants. The result? A haunting parade of victims locked in his basement, blind and broken, while his daughter unknowingly lives in luxury above. What makes this film unforgettable is its blend of medical horror and psychological obsession, tapping into real fears of science gone too far. Though not a mainstream hit, Mansion of the Doomed gained a cult following for its bold imagery, graphic intensity, and daring to push boundaries at a time when Hollywood was testing how far horror could really go. Today, it remains a disturbing relic of 70s exploitation cinema, equal parts terrifying and fascinating for film lovers who seek the extremes of storytelling. 15. Sisters, 1972. Brian De Palma's Sisters, 1972, is often called the director's first true dive into psychological horror and exploitation cinema. At first glance, it looks like a standard Hitchcock-inspired thriller, but beneath the surface, it's a disturbing exploration of identity, voyeurism, and violence. The story follows a beautiful young woman named Danielle, played by Margot Kidder, who seems sweet and innocent, until a shocking murder takes place in her apartment. What begins as a simple case of jealousy quickly spirals into a bizarre tale involving conjoined twins, medical experiments, and a journalist who becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth. What made Sisters so controversial at the time was not just its graphic depictions of violence, but its unapologetic focus on taboo subjects, psychological trauma, female identity, and the blurred line between sanity and madness. De Palma even used split screens and voyeuristic camera angles to put audiences in the role of a spy, forcing them to confront their own complicity in watching the horrors unfold. Critics were shocked, calling it lurid and exploitative, while others praised its boldness. Over time, Sisters gained a cult following and is now considered one of the earliest films that solidified De Palma's reputation as a master of provocative, boundary-pushing cinema. In the landscape of 1970s exploitation, Sisters stood out by blending high-art suspense with grindhouse shocks, making it a disturbing, unforgettable entry in the genre. 16. The Candy Snatchers, 1973. Few exploitation films from the 1970s hit audiences as hard as The Candy Snatchers. Released in 1973, this gritty crime thriller was shocking not just for its raw violence, but for its bleak outlook on humanity. The film tells the disturbing story of three criminals who kidnap a teenage girl, Candy, and bury her alive in the desert as ransom leverage against her wealthy father. But instead of a straightforward heist film, what unfolds is a grim spiral of betrayal, abuse, and moral collapse. Even among exploitation cinema, this movie dared to dive deeper into cruelty and hopelessness than most viewers were prepared for. What truly pushed the boundaries was its unflinching depiction of child endangerment and brutality. In fact, the most disturbing element is that Candy's father has no intention of saving her. His apathy becomes more terrifying than the kidnappers themselves. For audiences of the time, this flipped the script on expectations. It wasn't just criminals who were the monsters, but ordinary people hiding behind wealth and respectability. The film was low-budget and independently made, but its raw intensity earned it a cult reputation. Today, The Candy Snatchers is remembered as one of the darkest exploitation films of the 1970s, proof that even in a decade already brimming with boundary-pushing cinema, there were still movies willing to go where few dared. 17. Don't Go in the House, 1979. Among the late 70s exploitation horror films, Don't Go in the House is one of the most controversial and unsettling entries. Released in 1979, the movie dives into the disturbing psyche of a man named Donnie Kohler, who was abused as a child by his strict mother. When she dies, Donnie finds himself free, but also completely unhinged. He begins luring women back to his home, where he has built a steel-lined, fireproof room, and his twisted obsession with fire soon becomes the tool for his murders. The film shocked audiences at the time with its graphic imagery of women being burned alive, a depiction that many critics labeled as cruel and sadistic. Unlike some campy exploitation films, Don't Go in the House took itself seriously, and that seriousness made the violence even more disturbing. It was often compared to Psycho, 1960, for its killer living with mother's shadow theme, but this film stripped away subtlety and went straight for raw exploitation. Censors and critics were outraged, and the movie ended up on the UK's infamous Video Nasties list in the 1980s, banned for its extreme violence and perceived misogyny. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the film has gained a cult following over the decades. Today, it stands as a stark reminder of just how far 1970s filmmakers were willing to go in pushing the boundaries of on-screen horror, turning psychological trauma into exploitation spectacle. 18. The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. Released in 1976, The Witch Who Came from the Sea is one of the strangest and most disturbing exploitation films of its era, walking a tightrope between psychological horror and shocking taboo-breaking imagery. The story follows Molly, a troubled woman haunted by repressed childhood trauma. Her fantasies blur into violent reality as she begins targeting men she perceives as abusive or exploitative, leading to a series of brutal murders. What makes the film so unsettling isn't just the violence, but the way it portrays the mental breakdown of a woman shaped by years of hidden abuse, a subject rarely touched in cinema at the time. Shot on a low budget but filled with eerie seaside imagery and dreamlike sequences, the movie feels almost surreal. Critics and censors alike didn't know how to classify it. Was it horror, exploitation, or a raw character study? Because of its mix of sexual violence and disturbing psychological themes, The Witch Who Came from the Sea was placed on the UK's infamous Video Nasties list in the 1980s, effectively banning it for years. Over time, however, the film gained a cult following. Today, it's often discussed as an early example of exploitation cinema attempting to explore trauma and the dark psychology behind violence, something far deeper than its shocking surface suggests. For audiences in the 1970s, though, it was an unnerving experience that pushed well beyond the boundaries of what mainstream cinema was willing to show. 19. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left is often remembered as one of the most shocking exploitation films of the 1970s, a raw and disturbing entry that blurred the line between horror and reality. Released in 1972, this was Craven's directorial debut, and it instantly set him apart as a filmmaker unafraid to challenge audiences. The movie tells the harrowing story of two teenage girls kidnapped by a group of sadistic criminals. What follows is a brutal tale of violence and revenge, culminating in one of the most infamous climaxes of the decade. Unlike polished Hollywood productions of the time, Craven shot the film with a documentary-like grittiness, making the violence feel all too real. What made The Last House on the Left so controversial was not just its graphic content, but the way it mirrored real-world fears. America was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and nightly news broadcasts showed graphic images of brutality overseas. Craven tapped into that raw unease, creating a film that felt more like a reflection of society's darkest side than simple horror entertainment. Upon release, the movie was heavily censored, banned in several countries, and fiercely debated by critics. Some called it depraved, while others saw it as an unflinching critique of violence itself. Its tagline, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie, it's only a movie," became legendary in exploitation marketing, daring audiences to test their own limits. Today, The Last House on the Left is regarded as both a cult classic and a milestone in exploitation cinema. It paved the way for the revenge horror subgenre and introduced audiences to Wes Craven, who would later give the world A Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. Whether seen as shocking trash or brilliant social commentary, one thing is undeniable: it pushed the boundaries of what horror could be in the 1970s. And there you have it, 20 exploitation films from the 70s that truly pushed the limits of what audiences could handle. Love them or hate them, these movies left a permanent mark on cinema history, proving that the 70s were one of the boldest decades ever for film. If you enjoyed this deep dive into shocking cinema, don't forget to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more untold stories, countdowns, and explorations of Hollywood's most daring moments. Now it's your turn. Which of these films shocked you the most, or maybe even became one of your cult favorites? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, keep watching, keep exploring, and stay tuned here at Globewise Entertainment.